what would you do if a guest on your podcast turned around and said there are upsides to the murder of children? That's what happens in this conversation. And what makes it difficult is the person saying it isn't some random dude on the internet. He's a behavioral specialist who's worked with over 100,000 people and claims to have helped survivors of the worst trauma you can possibly imagine. So today we're going to pull this whole thing apart. What's actually been said, what's meant underneath it, where the logic holds, where it completely falls apart, and what both of these guys get right and wrong, because there's gold on both sides of this, but there's also some shit that needs to be called out. So let's get into it. I found this fascinating, this debate you could call it, because it really is a kind of a classic head versus heart battle with neither of the two being able to reconcile the other position. So I'll set the stage for you. I'll play it from the beginning and we will get into it.
I came into this podcast with Dr. John Demartini expecting to have a conversation about how our thoughts can impact our reality and how we can utilize our belief field to actually draw towards us those things that we're more resonant with. But what happened very quickly was something much different. We highlighted a bright point of distinction in our worldviews, and this turned into a very intense debate. And I think debate is healthy. I think when people have two different opinions and they stand by those opinions and still allow themselves to have the discussion, something greater emerges. Now, at some point, I didn't think that we could even make it through. It felt like the chasm was so wide that even having the conversation itself wasn't going to be fruitful or actually beneficial for the people listening. But as time went on, I'm more grateful for this conversation because I think it highlights two different worldviews. Is there such a thing as good and evil, or is it all the one source without distinction?
All right, so I'll leave that there. He kind of prefaces that and you can see where it goes. But right off the bat, Aubrey's giving the insights into how this went sideways. He came in expecting to talk about mindset, manifestation, and belief structures, the standard stuff you get from a Demartini conversation. Instead, he got a full-on philosophical cage match with the guy about whether good or evil exist. And fair play to him for putting it out. It gets pretty uncomfortable throughout the podcast, and I'd recommend going and watching the whole thing. But quick context for you guys out there. So if you don't know these two, John Demartini is a human behavioral specialist. He's been doing this for decades. He's got a specific method called the Demartini Method, where he takes people through traumatic events and helps them find the hidden benefits, dissolving the emotional charge by balancing the perception. He's worked with thousands of people doing this. I think he says 150,000 in the podcast. And my man Aubrey, he's the host and founder of On It podcast that comes from a spiritually grounded background, somewhat questionable in certain areas, but a morally firm world view. He believes in inherent value, the goodness of life, and moral obligation, which comes in heavy in this podcast. These two frameworks are about to smash into each other, which is pretty interesting. And to Aubrey's credit, he says up front, this is a debate and debate is healthy. I agree with that. He's not trying to cancel the guy. He's trying to have it out. So let's see how that goes. So the first part of this is the foundation, which I'll be quoting Demartini's answer about love and projection. So let's get into this part.
Beyond the outer appearance, there's nothing but love. All else is illusion.
Mm-hmm.
And that the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. And the questions make you conscious of what you've been unconscious of, so you can, if asking wise questions, become fully conscious of this love.
I agree with that. Strong and powerful questions are very good to excavate things internally. And generally, you do need to arrive at genuine insight through powerful questioning. I agree with that. So let's keep going.
What's the first question?
Whatever you perceive in the world around you is a projection of you. So whatever you see there, where do you do it in your own life, and how does it serve?
Now, this brings up the idea for me that what happens when somebody, through their own agency, through their own projection, their own will, their own intent, interferes with your own projection of what you're actually experiencing in your life, like some predation of some sort.
To yourself?
Well, no, somebody else comes and interferes with you in your life, so that seems to be also a factor in the universe, right? That there's people with their own will.
It's all on the way. It's whatever I perceive in others is me. So if I perceive somebody that's a predator, they're there to make me realize that they're representing a part of me that I haven't owned and loved and appreciated. And they're giving me a chance now to go and do that. So whatever we perceive in them is just, if we're resenting them, it's because it's reminding us of some part of ourselves that we haven't appreciated, that we're somehow feeling guilty or shame about. And they're bringing us that ability to go and discover that, find out how it served after all, and find out how they're serving us as our teacher, not our obstacle. So the predator is really the prey turned inside out, inside our own psyche.
So look, Demartini's opening position is this. Everything you perceive in the outside world is a reprojection of yourself. If you see a predator out there, that predator represents a part of you that you haven't owned and that you haven't loved or accepted. They are your teacher, not your enemy. Now look, there's a kernel of real psychology here. We can't get it twisted. This is basically Jungian shadow work. And the idea that what triggers you and what triggers you is somehow in others often reflects something unintegrated within yourself. I use this in my own work. It's legitimate and it's powerful when applied properly. It's actually pretty common in coaching and therapeutic circles. But what I want you to do is I want you to watch what he does with this. He takes a useful psychological tool and turns it into an absolute metaphysical claim. It's not sometimes your reactions to others reveal something about you. It's always without exception. Everything external is a mirror of you. That's a completely different claim. That's like saying because a hammer is useful, then everything must be a nail. It's the same mistake I see with people who've had one breakthrough in therapy and then try to turn their therapist framework into a religion. As they say, there's none so self-righteous as the newly converted. You can't do that with a tool because a tool has limits. Now, this is where Aubrey starts to push back and asks about what if someone punches you and challenges Demartini's position? But what he does here is interesting. Just take a look at this.
I think this is that's a strong mindset to have. I think as a working mindset hypothesis, that is a super helpful thing to have. But somebody could just ball up their fists, be on some drugs, and go punch you in the head. And is that something that you believe that you attracted into your life? Or is that just part of everybody operating from a place of agency?
Anytime you're perceiving and somehow impulsively seeking a pole, the opposite pole will be there for you. There's no separation. As Heraclitus described, the unity of opposites is always present. And if you see a pole and you're addicted and infatuated with one pole, the other pole is going to be something you resent and dislike and label. If you can see both sides simultaneous and see that there's a unity of opposites, you'll realize that it's there to teach us to not be attracted to one or repelled to the other, be able to see the whole at the same time.
All right, so Aubrey challenges him with a real simple question here. It's more of an objection, actually, rather than a question. What if somebody just walks up to you, it's fucked up on drugs, and punches you in the head? Pretty fair question. Does that mean that you attracted that? Is that somehow a part of you that you haven't integrated or metabolized and that somehow you need to because you're repressing that within yourself? And the thing what Demartini does here, and he does this throughout the podcast, he doesn't answer the question. He pivots to Heraclitus and the unity of opposites. This idea that whenever you're attached to one pole, the opposite pole shows up to balance you, which is a fascinating philosophical concept, but it doesn't address the question that was asked. So here's the thing. Demartini's framework is structured so that there's no possible counterexample to disprove it. Something bad happens, you haven't seen the other side. Someone disagrees, well, they must be trapped in one side of the equation, trapped in the other pole. You push back, well, that's just going to be your amygdala reacting, isn't it? There is no scenario where someone could present evidence and Demartini would go, yeah, fair enough, my framework doesn't apply here. When no evidence can challenge your theory, that's not a sign of how strong it is. It's a sign that it's not really a very good functioning theory. It's functioning as a belief system. I see this all the time in the self-help space. People build these airtight containers where nothing can get in to challenge the idea, and they mistake that for truth. It's not truth, it's just really good defense architecture. And anyone who does this work knows when there's a defense mechanism in place, what it's going to do is it's going to try to stop you from dissolving the very thing that it's protecting. Every theory that comes into being needs to be able to withstand pressure, and basically hold its own weight under pressure and be stress tested. This doesn't do that. This is simply an unfalsifiability. So now let's move ahead and get into the moral relativism phase, which is kind of like a core theme of this entire podcast.
In the Middle East, older men and younger girls are married for centuries, for at least 1,500 years. In America, you go to jail for it. So in their culture, it's a different culture. So if you have an international or a global view, you don't react to either of those poles. You don't see one because of your localization as good and the other bad. You see it from a perspective that is now understanding that these are pairs of opposites and there's a unity of opposites in the world. And for every ideologue that promotes one, there's an ideologue that promotes the other to counterbalance it, to keep the body and the you might say the soul of the world, the anima mundi, in equilibrium.
Okay, so this is where it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. Demartini brings up older men marrying young girls in parts of the Middle East, and it's been happening for thousands of years. So his point is that what's criminal here has been normal there for millennia. So if you take a global view, you shouldn't react to either pole. You should simply see it as a pair of opposites. Now, moral relativism is a real philosophical position. Serious thinkers have been engaged with it for as long as it's been around. But here's the problem with using it the way Demartini uses it. He's making an absolute claim that no moral claim is absolute. Essentially, he's saying it's universally true that nothing is universally true. Can you see the contradiction here? You can't stand outside all moral frameworks and declare all moral frameworks are equally valid, because that declaration is itself a moral framework. It's like saying, I have no beliefs. Well, mate, that is a belief. I hate to break it to you. Where this self-refuting claim lands here is this has been a known problem in philosophy since Plato. Demartini says no culture's morality is superior to another, but that statement is itself a moral position. It's asserting that tolerance and non-judgment are morally superior to moral conviction, which Aubrey is full of moral conviction, which I actually kind of respect him for in this podcast. He doesn't back down and he holds firm on his moral convictions. But Demartini is using an absolute to deny absolutes. If relativism is true, then someone who believes in moral absolutes is equally valid under his own framework, which means his position can't argue against theirs. The position undermines itself. You can't unravel the lie, you can only reveal the truth. And the truth here is that you can't use a universal claim to deny universal claims. So we'll continue on this, where Demartini starts to invoke the central limit theorem.
So I don't like to negate something because of my lack of seeing the whole. I'd rather go and dig deeper and find it. But I don't label it with it's bad or good. I just say it's an event. Now, how do we use it? In consequentialism, nobody knows the consequence of an action. We can assume it's positive or negative because of our training. But if we look over time, the central limit theorem shows that the bell curve distribution of positive and negative outcomes will eventually surface. So if we take a narrow, short-term view, we'll see positive or negative. If we take a long-term view, we will see that it's just inevitable growth process of learning.
again, he does this throughout this conversation. He borrows a concept from statistics, which is the central limit theorem, and then he applies this to ethics. The central limit theorem, it's important to understand, is about how sample means distribute around a population mean. It does not mean that moral outcomes balance out over time. That's a completely different domain. This is a category error. This is where he begins to apply the rules of one domain to a fundamentally different domain where they don't hold. Now, it sounds scientific, which gives it authority and strengthens Demartini's position, but the application is seriously invalid. You could just easily cite the central limit theorem to argue that hot and cold food balance out over a lifetime if you want to as well. The theorem doesn't make claims about moral events. It's about sampling distributions. I see this all the time where people grab something that sounds impressive from science and use it to justify a completely unrelated position, which Aubrey doesn't pick up on in this. It's content dressed up as context. The context underneath the actual driving structure has absolutely nothing to do with statistics.
Because we, with our incomplete awareness, label things only to find out that that label was our incompleteness. And Michael Montaigne traveled all over the world trying to find a universally morally ascended value system, only to discover that in time and space, none of them ever were ascended. So life and death and all these things that we label good and bad throughout history have been there and have been labeled good or bad depending on who you're taking sides with. A jihadist who is believing very strongly in eliminating anything that's not his belief is doing what he thinks is good in Afghanistan, where somebody in a Western world would think he's doing something evil. And Epictetus says that any human being will not do anything unless they believe there's more advantage and disadvantage in their value system at that time. And so they're going to do what they think is good, and somebody else may think it's bad, but that means that which is true? To the jihadist, his belief is his belief, and the other person's got a different belief. I'm trying to take a perspective that how do we find both sides in these things? Because if not, we take a side, and the more we take a side, the more we create an opposite. The side meaning, I'm right and you're wrong, you need to stop this is dangerous. Eventually, the more we try to do that, the more we create the very thing we're trying to eliminate.
All right, okay. So this is the false equivalence moment, and this is where this is categorically untrue. It's completely false. So Demartini says a jihadist believes he's doing good. Someone in the West thinks the jihadist is doing evil. Both are operating from their own values. Therefore, what? Neither is right. We shouldn't take a side. But here's what he's absolutely missing. Understanding why someone does something is not the same as saying what they did as morally neutral because it's trying to balance something out. You can fully trace the ideological pathway that leads someone to commit an atrocity and still say that the atrocity is wrong. He does this throughout the conversation. He will not take a side. But explanation is not justification for the acts. I do this in my own work every single day. I can explain why people do what they do, the programs, the childhood structures, the defense mechanisms, but I don't then turn around and say the behavior has no moral character. Both things exist simultaneously. You can hold both. Now, Demartini's work and my work do overlap. I've actually worked with a handful of people that have come to me after working with him. I know that his work works and he's fantastic at what he actually does. But to stay on point here where he's trying to prove his points, he reverts back to this same tactic throughout the conversation. Now, in this instance, this is a false equivalence. Demartini treats two moral frameworks as equally valid simply because both are sincerely held. But sincerity doesn't equal validity. A flat earther sincerely believes the earth is flat, but that doesn't make their position equivalent to an astronomer's. Not all moral positions are equal just because the people holding them believe in them strongly. You can evaluate moral frameworks, but do they minimize unnecessary suffering? Do they respect autonomy of conscious beings? Are they internally consistent? This isn't about cultural superiority here. It's about whether a framework holds up under scrutiny, which, based on Demartini's framework, you can't even challenge it because there's always a a way around it in order to get out of it so it doesn't hold up. You can't do that. So he says as well here, which is where I said before, this is not true, that the more we take a side, the more we would create the opposite. That's not necessarily true. So there is a grain of truth in specific political context relative to this. So heavy-handed opposition, we're seeing this in the world at the moment, can sometimes fuel resistance, okay? But the exception doesn't write the rule. So this is not a universal law. So as an example, opposing child abuse doesn't create more child abuse. In fact, it reduces it. Criminalizing drunk driving hasn't created more drunk driving, it's reduced it. Sometimes opposition to harmful behavior actually reduces it. That's why laws, social norms, and protective institutions exist and work very well. To present this as a metaphysical certainty is just not accurate. So let's continue into a more personal aspect here with Aubrey.
I have a really hard time with this, honestly, because if I went home today and somebody was assaulting my wife, I'm just driving home, had a nice podcast. We worked out some differences in our opinion and our ontology of morality and value, et cetera, and had a good time. And someone was in there assaulting my wife. I would forcibly stop it.
Probably. Because
no,
you would
not
value,
probably, 100%
well,
certainly. I wouldn't say, maybe this is his belief and this is my belief.
You're going to react in that setting exactly proportioned to your morality at the time. If you see what he's doing as evil, you're going to do what you can to stop him.
But it is evil.
In your perception, it will be. But
so you don't believe that there is actual evil?
No, I don't. I don't believe there's actual evil.
All right. This is where it starts to get personal. Aubrey says, if I come home and someone is assaulting my wife, I'm stopping it. Period. Full stop. And look, any man worth anything would say the same thing. I don't think that this is something that's really up for debate about whether you would do something. I'll stand in front of the people I care about and take the hit. It's not even a question. It's just what we do as men. Now, Demartini agrees Aubrey probably would act, but frames it as a reaction proportional to his morality at the time, not as a moral duty, not as instinct. Then the key exchange. Aubrey asked directly, so you don't believe there is actual evil? And Demartini says no. Flat out, no actual evil exists. And this is the inflammatory side of this podcast. There's more to come with it, which will continue now. But the fact that he can do that says that these two are now in complete opposition. You can see Aubrey start to get emotionally reactive as he goes on, and John probably, I would say, gets colder as he goes along in order to try to be right. The funny thing is with John is, for someone that doesn't really believe in right or wrong, he holds and defends his position to try to be right about the fact that there's no right or wrong.
If you valued him and somebody was supporting him and he thought that she had done something that challenged him, they may see it completely different. I'm not one to take a side on that. I'm one to say, I'm going to look at what I'm going to do in that moment. And in that moment, I might find out that I would be favorable on your wife's side for sure. Probably so. And I would probably do what I can to stop. But then you're going to be in situational ethics again. You're now going to go, okay, I may have saved her life, but I've just killed somebody. So I'm now taking I'm doing a situational moral system there. If I murdered a person out of self-defense, that's considered good in some countries. In other places, you've just killed somebody. Over here, you just saved somebody's life. You're a hero and a villain at the same moment. So you have to decide which one is your belief. If you have a belief that one's good by saving her and this one's bad by killing him, but saving it because it's defense, then that's the situational ethics that you put yourself in. I'm not going to make it good or bad. I don't know exactly what that's going to be in that setting.
Demartini does this thing he does repeatedly. He takes a genuinely complex scenario, the moral weight of killing someone in defense of another, and uses that complexity to argue that moral clarity is impossible in any scenario. But that doesn't follow. This is a major overgeneralization. So the existence of genuinely difficult moral dilemmas doesn't mean all moral situations are ambiguous like he makes out. Some things are just plain wrong. Torturing a child for fun is wrong. Full stop. You don't need a philosophy degree to know that. The fact that some questions are hard doesn't eliminate the easy ones. It's like saying because you can't tell the exact moment dawn becomes daylight, there's no difference between night and day. That's not how it works. And I'll continue to one more part here because this will follow on and wrap this section up.
I'm not going to make it good or bad. I don't know exactly what that's going to be in that setting. I know that hypotheticals, it's easy to come up with hypotheticals, but the probability of your wife having an attacker is less likely unless she's somehow trying to live in anxiety and overprotection and putting herself in a position where that might happen. I would rather her, not be in a position where that happens. Rather do what I can to keep that from happening.
This is an interesting position that John takes because he suggests Aubrey's wife would be less likely to be attacked unless she's living in anxiety and overprotection and putting herself in a position where that might happen. This is flat out victim blaming he does here. It implies victims of violence bear causal responsibility through their mental state. The causal agent of an assault is the assailant. The idea that anxiety attracts violence has absolutely no scientific basis here, yet he acts like it does. Look, I've worked with people enough to know who've been through trauma to tell you they didn't attract it through their mental state. That's not how it works. That narrative in and of itself is dangerous and it keeps people stuck in shame instead of moving through it. You can't just say, well, it was in your psychology. How do you place that upon a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old that gets cancer and say, well, what did you do to attract this in? I'm sorry, that's not a position that I buy. And I agree with Aubrey as he's in the same position with it as well. Okay, so I'm going to play a series of clips now for Aubrey, which is he's appealing to embodied knowledge.
Because if you just make it black and white and you don't look deeper, you assume that that's bad and good, and you never get to understand why that's happening.
No, I don't assume it. I actually know it. I actually know it in my body. Like I think, and I think this is actually a common sense sacred axiom. If you see somebody abusing somebody innocently, so that's wrong.
There's one aspect that I want you guys to look at where he has this appeal to embodied knowing, saying there's something that lives inside of me that knows with, his hand on his heart. So I'm going to play one more.
If I see somebody boiling a child, I'm going to fucking stop it. If I see somebody putting a cat in a microwave and about to push start, I'm going to fucking stop it.
I would probably too. But at the same time...
And it's not because of some trauma or some pattern. It's because there's value that lives inside of me.
So this is where Aubrey has this appeal to embodied knowing. Now, I've been going on Demartini a little more on this because I think less people would pick up on the stuff that he's engaging in. But let me be fair. There are moments where Aubrey's arguments have gaps too. And this is one of them. When Aubrey gets pushed on why he believes in good and evil, his primary defense is essentially, I feel it. I know it in my body. My embodied moral sense that tells me this is true. It's intrinsic to the cosmos. So he defers authority to the cosmos, yet he's the conduit to know what the cosmos is actually talking about. And look, on some level, I kind of agree with the conclusion. Some things are wrong, but I feel it in my body is not an argument. It's a conviction. There's a big difference between those two. When you're in a philosophical debate with someone who's been sharpening their position for years, you can't bring a feeling framework to this debate. Your body isn't evidence to another person. It's evidence to you. And if someone says, well, my body tells me the opposite, which is exactly what Demartini's clients claim after doing this process, then you've got two bodies disagreeing and no way to resolve it. So in Aubrey's gap, there's this appeal to felt sense without any philosophical grounding. So strong moral intuitions are real and they do matter. I work with the body. I know what somatic truth feels like for me and for someone else. But when you're making a public argument, you need to be able to articulate why those intuitions point to something real. There are centuries of moral philosophy, from Aristotle's virtues to Kant's categorical imperative to utilitarian frameworks. These give you language and structure for the very thing Aubrey is trying to say here. He's got the right answer, but he's not showing his working as to why he's saying it. And against someone like Demartini here, who's got a system, you need a system. A gut feeling, no matter how right it is, can't carry a 2-hour debate on its own. And Aubrey, sometimes this can even be a little bit of spiritual narcissism that he brings in here, that I know because of the cosmos. And look, let's have a look at Aubrey's other antics in one of his other podcasts. I did a breakdown on that some time ago where he was saying I was in the pyramid in, I don't know where he was, Luxor or Giza, and he said that Isis spoke to him and told him that he needs to impregnate 2 women. Like, dude, come on, man. Like, your intrinsic download mechanism of the cosmos, I don't think is very accurate sometimes, especially when it's for your own gain. However, in this, he's using it for moral conviction, which on some level I do agree with. So now let's get into the section that's probably going to hit people the hardest.
So you don't believe in any universal ethics, any universal values where like child abuse is always bad?
Don't know, because what is child abuse? That's the thing. We would call child abuse here in America
Having sex with a 5-year-old.
Well, I've seen brothers and sisters have incest in a bathtub and having sex with each other and playing with
I'm
each
talking
other.
about an adult having sex with a 5-year-old.
Well, that's not my preference. That's not something that I have experienced in my life.
So Aubrey's getting over it here, you can tell. He's just he's hitting him sharply with cutting John off before he can answer, because he's kind of getting over the psychological lesson here. So Aubrey's asking a very direct question here. Is child abuse always bad? And instead of saying categorically yes, Demartini asks, well, what is child abuse? When Aubrey specifies an adult having sex with a 5-year-old, Demartini starts explaining the psychology behind why pedophilia happens. Now, this will be his anecdotal evidence, not scientific evidence. Now, let me be precise about what's going on here with Demartini. He does not say child sexual abuse is acceptable. He never says that. What he does is refuse to condemn it. He redirects every moral question into a causal explanation. Every time Aubrey says this is wrong, Demartini says, yeah, but here's why it happened. And this is where I have a massive problem. I've worked with people that have suffered from this type of trauma before. I've worked with some satanic ritual abuse survivors. I've worked with people who couldn't leave their house because of what was done to them as children. One woman I worked with that was an extreme case. She couldn't leave the house. She had severe agoraphobia, severe OCD, severe conditions of trauma from this. And once we started to open up the subconscious programming that were keeping her trapped, her life started to look a little easier. Of course, you can never fully resolve that, in my opinion. But she was able to leave the house. She was able to reclaim some of her life. And she actually went on to start to save children from the same environment that she was tortured in. She found the gift. She transcended it. Now, this is the critical part. Finding the gift doesn't mean that the event was morally neutral. Just because someone hasn't had that happen to them doesn't mean the other side needed to happen to this woman in order to balance it out. What it means is that this woman and everyone else that suffered this, that decides to face it, are extraordinary human beings who transformed what happened to them into purpose. That's their strength. Not evidence that the abuse was neutral. Not evidence that the abuse must have been some cosmic balance that you can't prove. You can absolutely understand the causal structure, the programs, the trauma, the defenses, the psychology of both the perpetrator and the survivor without refusing to say the act is wrong. So you have to hold both. You must, in my opinion. You must hold both if you're going to be of any use to the people that you're working with. This is where I've heard people say to people with really traumatic childhoods at 4 or 5, well, what did you do to cause that? What did you do to cause that? What did you do to attract that in? I find that reprehensible. And I find that sitting from a place of coldness to have to ask what a 4-year-old must have done to be, abused by their father or their mother. It's horrible. So where this goes a little wrong is Aubrey asks, is child abuse always wrong? Demartini answers, here's the psychology of why pedophilia occurs. 2 completely separate questions. This is a moral question, the first one. And the second is a psychological one. You can't answer, well, you can answer both, but he chooses not to in this. You can say, yes, it's wrong, and here's why it happens, and here how we can help prevent it in the future. Understanding why someone commits an act does not resolve whether the act is wrong, the explanation again is not the justification. Now, this is where I think Aubrey has difficulty in separating the two. He thinks because John doesn't condemn it and he has a causal explanation that somehow that he must be in support of it for denying the existence of evil. So Demartini also cites in the podcast that he's worked with, I think it was 1,300 cases of pedophilia. And this makes him as an implicit authority for his perspective. But the number of cases he's worked with validates his clinical or coaching or therapeutic experience, whatever he labels himself as. This is not moral framework. These are two separate things. So we'll play a clip just after this where Aubrey really starts to get a little fired up.
It's not okay. It's just fundamentally it's not okay to beat a child to a pulp. It's not okay to sexually assault a child. It's not okay to murder people wantonly. There is something actually fundamental inside of us that is actually on a driving force towards life, love, freedom, the experience to live this beautiful world. And if somebody is intentionally interfering with that, we have an obligation, we have an obligation to try and prevent or stop that.
Well,
see, John hesitates there. Now, you can see Aubrey's starting to draw a line here. He's marking his case and saying, I don't know if I'm going to keep going past here. He's not interested in a psychology lesson anymore. He's already getting tired of John's responses, but he's making a moral claim here. And it's one that lives in most people's bodies, mine included. Our job is to protect children, not abuse them. It's beyond me how anyone can raise their hand to a child or hurt or want to do some of the heinous acts that are appearing in our world at the moment to children. That's not primitive. It's not your amygdala being unsophisticated. That is a signal that is deeply instinctual in many of us. Mothers, fathers, even strangers that don't know children around. When they see a children being hurt, most people will intervene. Now, continuing on, this is the moment that the conversation will pivot.
Because to say it's just an evil event and there's no benefits to it is very narrowed. The reality is that there's upsides to that event. I worked with a lady after the big event.
There's upsides to the murder of children?
Yes, there's upsides to it.
I think we're going to have to stop here, John.
Well, you're too black and white, I guess, for me to be able to share.
I actually respect Aubrey's response there. So this moment is where the conversation pivots, because that's very hard to come back to. And it's very hard to come back from as well. Demartini says there's upsides to the murder of children. Yes, there's upsides to it. And Aubrey says, I think we're going to have to stop here there. He's just kind of like, I'm over it. Now, what I want to do is I want to steelman Demartini's position for a second here, because what he's actually trying to say really matters. Even if how he says it is fucking appalling, his point is that even after the worst possible event, surviving family members sometimes experience positive downstream consequences of the trauma. A family can sometimes come together, it can repair broken relationships, a mission can be born of it, a life will redirect. And look, I talk about this constantly. There's always a gift on the other side of difficulty. Your greatest tragedies can and are actually, in my opinion, meant to be transcended into your greatest triumphs. I feel, for me personally, that's the whole game of this. That's the game that we're playing. But here's where the logic falls apart here. And this is the most important fallacy in the entire conversation. What happens here is the fact that something good can come after a terrible event does not change the moral nature of the event itself. A hurricane might lead to better building codes, new roads, or build a new house, but that doesn't inherently make the hurricane good. The growth that follows tragedy is a response to the tragedy. It's not a physical property of the tragedy. If you take this logic to its conclusion, nothing can ever be bad because something good will always eventually follow it. And if nothing can be bad, then nothing can be good either. And then Demartini's own work of helping people is also morally neutral, which means he shouldn't really be defending all these points with such vigor. So this framework begins to eat itself after a while. It's like the ego. It's the thing that's trying to kill morality is the morality. The thing that's trying to kill the ego is the ego. The thing that's trying to prove nothing matters is proving that it matters to him that nothing matters. So every example that Demartini uses involves survivors or surviving family members who were able to reframe their experience. But the framework has nothing to say about the person who was killed. You can't ask a murdered child to find the upside in the event. You can't do the Demartini method on someone who's dead. By only counting the cases where reframing was possible, he's excluding the very people that were the most harmed. It's like surveying lottery winners and concluding that buying lottery tickets is a solid investment strategy. That's just not how you measure something. It's not complete. So here we go on to Aubrey. We'll continue on this one, actually. It's interesting where he says, you're too black and white for me to share, but by definition, Demartini's framework is completely black and white.
Can I share my story? You can turn it off. I don't care. I'm not here attached to it.
I think that if you're saying I'm not here attached to it, then you're attached to it, because he seems to be very attached to his points that he's defending very rigorously here.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you that I went to the thing with the Timothy McVeigh thing that was blowing up in there, and I met with a family that had the little blonde girl that was killed in the bombing. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I met with the family. I talked to the whole family. She said, and this is her quote, one of the greatest things that ever happened in my life is that bombing. That's what she said. This is the mother who lost the child.
That doesn't mean
and there's a
that
picture
every
of the restaurant with the girl there, with the blonde girl there. She now has two children, one that looks almost identical. She has a new relationship with a new man. Her business is booming. Her life is unfolded. She's now contributing. The daughter is contributing in a way from the story. And she looked at it and she says, if that hadn't happened, I would not be where I am today. I was with a alcoholic husband that was beating me and my daughter. My life was on Skid Row almost. And that event changed my life, and it blessed me with a new husband, new children, new things like that. So I just go, okay, she has this perspective that this has been a great turning point in her life. We don't want to rob people of that. We don't want to rob people.
Yeah, but the little blonde girl was robbed of her life.
And that's where Aubrey absolutely nails it. He nails the blind spot. And the little blonde girl whose life was taken, she doesn't get to come to the seminar. She doesn't get to do Demartini's method. She doesn't get to find the blessing. The framework only works for the living, and it quietly excludes the dead. Sit with that for a minute. So I've been going pretty hard on Demartini, but I want to just bring something back to Aubrey's spiritual narcissism. You know, this is kind of throughout, and it's in all of his podcasts, in my opinion. Not that I've seen all of them, but I would just imagine they are. So I say this with a lot of respect, because I think his instincts are largely correct, but there's a pattern in this conversation where Aubrey elevates his moral position from, I believe this, to the cosmos itself agrees with me. He talks about his moral sense being intrinsic to the cosmos I am participating in. He frames his position not just as right, but as cosmically ordained. And I got to be honest, I've said this before about him, but there's spiritual narcissism at play here. And I don't use that term lightly, but when someone takes a moral position and then wraps it in the language of cosmic truth without doing the philosophical work to support it, they're doing something similar to what Demartini does, just from another direction. Demartini wraps his moral neutrality in the language of science and physics. Aubrey wraps his moral conviction in the language of cosmic consciousness, both addressing up a personal perspective as universal truth, really without earning it. So the problem here isn't the conviction, it's the packaging. When you say the cosmos agrees with me, you've removed yourself from the conversation. He does this in his other podcast on radical monogamy, where he says, ISIS told me to impregnate both of you, or I got a message or a download from spirit that I need to jump on Raya and message someone on there. Like, yeah, dude, a fucking celebrity app with hot models. Yeah, I'm sure you're going to have trouble meeting someone on there. So this packaging that he comes up with, which is the cosmos agrees with me, when you remove yourself or abdicate the responsibility to the cosmos, who's going to argue with that? No one can argue with an unverifiable claim that ISIS told him to impregnate his new girlfriend and his wife. It's the same unfalsifiability trap Demartini falls into, just with a different aesthetic. If your position is truly strong, you don't need to invoke the universe to back you up. You just need clear thinking, good reasoning, and a willingness to show your work. Aubrey's got the heart, but in this debate, he needed more head. When the head and the heart aren't integrated, like these two are the complete opposite poles of this, you get either cold detachment like Demartini or hot conviction without structure like Aubrey. Neither one on its own gets you there. And just more on a personal thing, Aubrey's pretty uncontained. He seems quite leaky in multiple ways, and his conviction in here has no structure in it, which speaks to the personification of his energetic expression most of the time. So let's continue.
Now, the question is this repression in this group over here causing that person to be the one that's outletting it? If so, pointing our finger at them is really very shallow. Let me explain something in a family time. You have a brother or sister?
Yeah, several.
Okay. Well, there's someone in your family that's playing out the opposite pole of you.
See, Demartini's body language, even by this part, this is an hour in. If you watch the first, I think, 10, 15 minutes, he's very calm. He sits with his hands down. He's breathing slowly. His tone is a lot more gentle. At this point, he's very rigid and he's jittery and he's jolting and he's a lot more animated than what he was earlier. It's just an interesting note to pick up on when you go and watch this.
There's somebody out there in the family dynamic, because family dynamics, the summation of all family dynamics cancel each other in value systems. So whatever you think is good, there's somebody who's going to play the opposite to you. And the more you're morally right, the more it's going to be situational, or the more you're directed and clear in agency, the more they just go with the flow. There'll be pairs of opposites in that family, and you're smiling because you know there's truth in that.
No, that's bullshit. That's not true. Like, I know so many families where that's just not true.
Well, okay.
I mean, like, you can't say that in every single family you're going to have the two opposite poles expressed. That's crazy.
In the family dynamic,
every single family?
In genetic expression, the family dynamic has pairs of opposites. I don't know.
My wife has one sister. They're both lovely, sweet. I know them deeply.
But they're both lovely to somebody.
No, they're actually objectively lovely.
Okay. But in a family dynamic, you're not giving me the whole family. You're giving me the two sisters.
Okay. Okay. So then you're saying, like,
the whole family,
in the broader family dynamic.
The summation of the whole family are complementary opposites that equal love. And so that mechanism is not just in a micro world in the sense of a family, it's global.
Here's where Demartini does it again. He claims that in every family, the summation of all values and behaviors cancels out. Whatever one member expresses, another expresses the opposite. Then he extends this to the entire planet and uses the Global Peace Index in this. And that supposedly shows peace and war in perpetual balance. Now, where again, this is another unfalsifiable claim because he moves the goalposts. When Aubrey challenges the family balance idea, because Aubrey's had enough at this point, I'd say, his wife's family, both sisters, are kind and loving objectively. Now, he's like, no, they're objectively lovely. So that's not accurate. There'll be some people that would find them annoying and say that they're not lovely. But for the sake of illustration and breaking this down and what Demartini did, we'll stick with him. Demartini just expands the frame after this. You're not giving me the whole family. Every counterexample gets absorbed by widening the boundary. There's no configuration of a family that could disprove this claim because the frame always shifts. This is completely defensive in the way that he does this, Demartini. This is not analysis. If your theory can accommodate any outcome, it's not actually predicting anything. It's just a really sophisticated way to never be wrong, which he's really good at. And the ego loves that. The ego loves a framework where it can never be challenged. Why? Because the ego's number one motivation is to be right. So we'll continue and watch the next part around the Global Peace Index.
Every single thing out there that somebody believes in and has a value on, there's somebody with an opposite set of values. It's a complete spectrum of values.
But it has to equal out in a single
They're
family.
They're equal across the planet. This has been shown by Michael Montaigne.
Maybe across the cosmos. I actually believe in this.
There has to be symmetry across the cosmos. We started with symmetry.
But to imagine that the cosmos has to be reflected in a single family, why can't one whole family be
because
be
inside
on one
the
pole and one other whole family be the opposite pole, and then that creates the
marry each
balance.
other, and they'll marry each other.
No, they won't. They won't. They don't.
I assure you there's a law of similars and differences. The law of similars and differences, when you infatuate with somebody, you see more similarities and differences. When you resent somebody, you see more differences and similarities. So you're attracted to the similarities because of that. So you're attracted to it. But you attract the opposite because the person has both sides. So you're going to get both sides, the nice, the mean, the kind, the cruel, the positive, the negative, the peace and war. So to say that there's not a pair of opposites in families is just not seeing the obvious, because it is. It may not be in the two sisters. They may have the brother that's playing the opposite or a father that's playing the opposite, but there's a pair of opposites in that family. The same thing occurs on social structure. That's why you have a balance of peace and war in the Global Peace Index. People think they're going to go out and create world peace. It's a complete delusion and fantasy. Peace and war has been on the balance and has stayed balanced, and every year they document it. 99.7% of the population in the world is being monitored by 23 parameters in every country showing that these things maintain balance. And if you look at the borders of European borders for the last 1,000 years, there hasn't been 1 year that hasn't had war going on in those countries. So peace and war is.
I don't think that's accurate. Actually, I think if we look this up, right
Global
now,
Peace Index. Look it up.
Okay. Historically speaking, has there been
there's peace and war,
more or less war as time?
Well, no, hold on, man. If you ask different people, they're going to take a side. If
I'm asking AI.
I know, but ask the Global Peace Index, which is monitoring the 23 parameters that they base it on by scholars today. It has 83 countries, it's more peace, and 81 countries, it's more war. Next time it goes 82, 81, 83, it fluctuates.
Historically speaking, the long-term trend in war and violence shows a substantial decline over thousands of years, though with important nuances depending on the time frame and metric.
Yes, but that's based on just military war. That's not based on what their parameters are. We have banking wars, economic wars, relationship wars. There's conflicts.
Then the Global Peace Index is talking about banking wars?
It's talking about all forms of conflict and peace that go on in the world, and it fluctuates.
All right. So, okay. He's done it again, right? So the Global Peace Index shows peace and war in perfect balance. When Aubrey checks this, the data actually shows a long-term decline in violence over thousands of years. Demartini's really good at this because this is what he does. He dismisses that by saying it only counts military war, not banking wars, economic wars, relationship wars. He redefines war until the claim can't be disproven. But the Global Peace Index does account for multiple forms of conflict and instability. It uses 23 indicators. The long-term trend still shows decline. He's misrepresenting the very data he's citing here, which when you really listen to this podcast, Demartini sounds really intelligent, but when you start to dig into the frameworks that he uses, it doesn't really hold up under scrutiny. So we'll play, this will be the last one that I'll do.
Most of our responses are unconscious. Most. Very few people actually have a conscious awareness. 200 milliseconds after they did the act, they come up with a bullshit reason why they did it. That's not conscious awareness. That's an automaton reacting and coming back and backdating the information, saying that's why they did it. Most people are reacting unconsciously. Most behavior.
When the Zoroastrians were moving across and encountering different cultures and tribes, one of the things that they saw was that one of the rituals being performed where they were boiling children in vats of oil. And they came through and they said, hey, there's a different way that you can do this. You can just burn some sticks in the fire, and then you don't have to boil any more children. To me, that is a clear evolution of morality and value. I don't think we should regress back to, well, if you want to boil children and
well, I'm not interested in boiling children. I have no desire to boil a child.
No, but the difference is I have a desire to stop people from boiling children.
Well, that may be so, because that maybe you got a wound in your childhood that basically
it's not because I have a wound, it's because boiling children
Nobody does something without a motive. There's a void somewhere in there, or you wouldn't be having that, because you would go on to something else. If you're focused on stopping boiling children, then there's something in your childhood.
If I see somebody boiling a child, I'm going to fucking stop it. If I see somebody putting a cat in a microwave and about to push start, I'm going to fucking stop it.
I would probably too. But at the same time,
and it's not because of some trauma or some pattern. It's
well,
because there's
because
there's value that lives inside of me. It's actually intrinsic to the cosmos. I am participating in.
But then you're saying that somehow they're not intrinsic. The person that's boiling them is not intrinsic.
They're able to. There are forces that are actually looking to separate us. Father Sean O'Leary says, evil is a cosmic conspiracy to separate you from
that's dissociation.
Source or love.
That's just dissociation. If you dissociate, anytime you put evil out there and good out there and give an anthropomorphic to make a devil and an anthropomorphic to make a savior, you just dissociated yourself from all of you. That's you. That's all you.
Right. Okay. So this is the moment, right, where Demartini's framework shows something pretty troubling. Aubrey brings up the Zoroastrians encountering cultures that boiled children alive in oil. The Zoroastrians said, you can burn sticks in the fire instead. And Aubrey sees that as a clear evolution of morality. And Demartini's response, he asks Aubrey why he's so focused on stopping it. He suggests there's a void somewhere or a wound in your childhood, otherwise it wouldn't matter to you, you'd move on. This was wild that he went there with this. It was a defensive ad hominem attack to say that Aubrey must be motivated by trauma. So instead of engaging with the actual argument, is it wrong to boil children? He deflects and then attacks the person making the argument by psychoanalyzing their motivation. Now, I do this for a living. I look at programs underneath people's behavior. I help people see the unconscious structures driving their decisions, but I would never in a million years use that as a way to dismiss someone's moral claim or their conviction. Can you imagine saying you only care about protecting children because you have some wound? Do you hear how fucking insane that sounds? By that logic, including Demartini, anyone with strong moral convictions is just acting out of trauma. Every person who stands up for something is just working through their issues. That's not analysis. That's a dismissal technique that's disguised as intelligence. And it's a fucking shit one. And even if Aubrey's concern did partly stem from personal experience, which who cares if it did, because boiling children is abhorrent and obscene at the highest level, that still wouldn't invalidate it. But he tries to invalidate it. Demartini tries to invalidate it. The source of a belief and the truth of a belief are separate questions. I care about protecting children partly because of what I went through as a kid. I care about helping men to make sure that they don't get caught up in the same things that I did as a kid. Does that make me wrong? Does that make my conviction less valid? Fuck no. If anything, it gives me more authority, not less. The gift from my own childhood was that I became someone who protects. That's the whole point of transcending your tragedy into triumphs. Aubrey's response is the cleanest line in the whole conversation. It's not because of some trauma or some pattern. It's because there's value that lives inside of me. And I would say if there was a case or a line to win this entire debate, that was it. He does this as well, Aubrey. This will be the last one that I go into with Aubrey while I'm here. Throughout the conversation, when Demartini presents something that challenges Aubrey's position, Aubrey's emotional intensity increases. He's quite reactive. His voice gets louder. He sometimes leans forward. You can see the activation in his body. And there are a couple of moments throughout the podcast where that intensity actually weakens his position rather than strengthening it. Now, why does that matter, especially when the topics he gets emotional about are certainly valid to be emotional about? But in a debate like this, the person who gets more emotional usually looks like they're losing, even if they're right. We saw that with Andrew Wilson versus Chuck, someone. And she said, well, your wife has 3 baby daddies. And he's like, shut the fuck up, you stupid bitch.
Your wife has 3 baby daddies and has been married twice before.
And you
you lick
sniz.
Under your religion.
You lick sniz.
What does that
You're
mean?
a fucking dyke. Don't talk shit about my wife, you stupid bitch. Shut your fucking mouth.
Whoa. And you can see, even though like she was wrong for bringing that up with Andrew because Andrew's wife was not there to defend herself, so it was a cheap tactic. The way that Andrew responded emotionally by saying, so you lick sneers, you stupid bitch, shut the fuck up, you stupid bitch, he lost the debate, even though he was right to defend his wife and Charlie shouldn't have brought it up. It's the same way that Aubrey here gets emotional and it makes him seem like he's losing the debate. Demartini stays calm throughout, almost robotically so, and that calm gives the appearance of authority. Even though he does get a little wild up and a little jerky, he's kind of got moves like a pigeon head that go like that, Demartini, after a while. Now, it shouldn't be that way, but it does. And Aubrey's emotional escalation, while completely authentic and understandable, ends up playing into Demartini's framework, because Demartini can sit there and say, see, he's reacting from his amygdala. I told you so. He's trapped in one pole. So I think Aubrey mistakes intensity for strength. There's a difference between chemistry and intensity, between conviction and reactivity. I talk about this in relationships. Intensity should be avoided just because it gets confused with significance. What people mistake for passion is often just activation. The same principles apply here with Aubrey and John. Aubrey's most powerful moments in this conversation are when he's calm, when he's clear and direct. Like the little blonde girl was robbed of her life and he's like, what about this? He's clear, he's concise, and he's calm. That's devastating in its simplicity and how he delivers it. His weakest moments are when the heat takes over. Capacity as a man means being able to hold difficult things without the heat consuming you. You know, things like I've got it, I'll handle it. That's what strength sounds like. It's not volume. Being calm makes you strong as a man. Getting angry and fighting on emotion, you make mistakes. Same principle whether you're in a debate, a relationship, or a boxing ring. Let's bring this together for Demartini's framework with what I think is the most important observation about this entire conversation. Demartini spends over an hour arguing there is no good or evil. Moral labels are just projections. We should see both sides without judgment. But watch what he actually does. He judges moral absolutism as narrow and primitive. He judges victimhood as inferior to mastery. He judges his own method as more effective and more enlightened than anything else. He judges Aubrey for being emotional. He presents his worldview as higher, wiser, and more evolved. Every single one of these is a moral judgment. Everyone. And he can't see it. Even though this is the dude that cracks people's blind spots, he can't see his own one. The thing that's trying to come through here is he's so convicted in being right, even though he says he doesn't care about being right. His entire position, in my opinion, is self-defeating. He argues that making moral judgments is wrong, but that itself is a moral judgment. He says seeing one side is narrow and seeing both sides is wise, but narrow and wise are value distinctions. He says victims should become masters, but that's a should, where he said earlier about I don't play should on things. But that's a should and an imperative, the very thing he claims to reject. His philosophy of no good and evil only works because he smuggles moral judgments in through the back door while denying they exist at the front door. He's using the very thing he says doesn't exist as the foundation for everything that does. If there is truly no good or evil, then helping someone find meaning in their trauma is no better than not helping them. Leaving someone stuck in victimhood is no worse than liberating them. Mediating conflict is simply no better than walking away. Basically, nothing means anything. Demartini's entire life's work is predicated on a belief that what he does is good and valuable. The belief is a moral claim. It contradicts everything he says he believes. His practice refutes his philosophy. He's the most moral person in the room who also happens to be arguing that morality doesn't exist. So, what both sides get right, and we'll wrap this up here. Let me land this properly because they both have something important to offer, okay? And the truth lives in the integration of both. Demartini is right that we often condemn in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. He's right that moral rigidity can trap people in victimhood. He's right that there's therapeutic power in finding meaning in suffering. His method clearly works for a lot of people, and the principle underneath it that your greatest tragedies can be transcended into your triumphs is real. I live by that. I teach that. I work with it every single day. So Aubrey is right in that some things are just wrong. He's right that we have a moral sense that lives in us that transcends cultural conditioning. He's right that understanding why someone does something doesn't erase the moral character of what they did. And he's right that we have an obligation to protect the vulnerable. Our job as men, as people, is to protect children and those more vulnerable than us. It is our sacred duty, not because they're weak, but because they're important. Where Aubrey falls short is in the philosophical grounding of his position and the emotional regulation of his delivery. He's got the right answer, but doesn't always show his workings, and his intensity sometimes undermines his authority in the room. The truth is that both can be held simultaneously. You don't have to choose. Events can be transformed through perception, and some events are genuinely wrong. Post-traumatic growth is real, and the trauma that preceded it was still a violation. You can find the gift and still call the act what it was. The ability to grow from suffering is a testament to human resilience, not evidence that suffering is neutral. You can't unravel the lie, you can only reveal the truth. And the truth here is that love and moral responsibility aren't opposites. They're the same thing. So, here's what I'm left with. Demartini has an incredibly powerful therapeutic tool, but he's made the mistake of turning a method into metaphysics. What works in a therapy room or a coaching space doesn't necessarily describe the fundamental nature of reality, which is what he's trying to do. Helping someone reframe their trauma or a tragedy is not the same as proving the trauma is morally meaningless. It's a tool, and a tool has limits. Aubrey, for all the moments where his argument could have been sharper, did something that takes real courage. He sat across from someone with decades more experience in this, someone who's used to being the authority in the room, and he held his ground. He didn't back down, he didn't get swayed, and he still treated the man with respect at the end. It's pretty solid in my opinion. That's how you show up. So, let me know what you thought of this. Let me know if you agree. Do you think there's such thing as genuine good and evil, or is it all just wrapped up in perception? Drop it in the comments below, and if this breakdown helped you think through this conversation differently, subscribe, send it to someone else, because this is the kind of thing we do here. And I'll see you in the next one.